Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare Podcast. This episode deals with the second half of Othello, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5, so that students have a sense of what's happening in the play and in what order. Just to recap from the previous episode, Act 1 of Othello takes place in Venice and concerns Othello's marriage to Desdemona and the impending war in Cyprus. Act 2 is set in Cyprus, where the war has been ended by a storm and Cassio has been discredited at the celebrations that follow. So Act 3 opens with Cassio and musicians, a sign perhaps that there's been an interval and the play is about to begin again. They're outside Othello's lodgings. There's a short scene with the clown, usually omitted in productions because it doesn't really add anything to the play. Enter Iago to remind us of his villainous plan, which, of course, Cassio thanks him for. Iago sends his wife Emilia to speak with Cassio. Emilia tells Cassio that Desdemona is already speaking to Othello on his behalf. In other words, she's already doing what he wants to ask her to do. Somehow, Cassio ignores what Emilia has just told him and asks her to organise a meeting with Desdemona. Emilia doesn't argue with Cassio, she just agrees to his request. Notice that Cassio has the chance to step away from the course of action that will lead to the tragedy. That's very William Shakespeare. Meanwhile, in scene 2, Othello is looking over the island's defences. Basically, Othello's at work. But back at Othello's house, his wife is having a meeting with Cassio. She is of course being chaperoned by her maid, Emilia, so everything is respectable. Emilia says her husband, Iago, wants her to have this meeting with Cassio as if it was his own problem. But we know the real reason why Iago wants this meeting. And Desdemona says, "Oh, that's an honest fellow." And we, the audience, know that Iago isn't an honest fellow. Notice that the conversation between Desdemona and Cassio is very formal and polite. Othello and Iago come back from work, and Cassio leaves. Iago immediately uses Cassio's departure to plant suspicion in Othello's mind. But Desdemona has nothing to hide, so she freely admits that it was Cassio she was speaking to. Then she wants to know when can she discuss the situation with Othello about Cassio being discredited. And he says not now, and she says but when, and Othello says leave me alone, and she says okay then and leaves. So it's not like a full-blown argument, but it's a long way away from the reunion scene at the beginning of Act 2 where they're all lovey-dovey. Iago uses this situation to sow further doubt into Othello's mind. Is Cassio honest, quote unquote? You will have noticed that the word honest crops up a lot in this play. Should Iago say what he's really thinking? As Iago says, men should be what they seem. Iago tells Othello, as if Iago obviously is, what he seems to be, but he's talking about Cassio and not about himself. Iago says he shouldn't have to tell anyone what he's thinking. After all, slaves can keep their thoughts to themselves. But finally, Iago admits that, quote, "off my jealousy ships faults that are not," which is true because he suspects that Othello, of course, might have slept with his wife, Emilia. But Othello only applies the comment to his own situation with Desdemona. Iago then discusses with Othello the importance of reputation, having told Cassio at the end of Act 2 that reputation is meaningless, and how he, Iago, shouldn't say anything that affects someone's, quote, good name. This only makes Othello more curious as to why Iago won't speak. Having rejected Iago's other arguments, Iago warns Othello of the perils of being jealous. Quote, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." Again, this is very William Shakespeare, that Iago should warn Othello against jealousy. All this reminds us of Iago's speech in Act 2, Scene 3, and what's he then that says I play the villain? Having got us, the audience, to the point where Iago is telling Othello to avoid jealousy, Shakespeare pushes on with the dramatic irony. That's where characters say more than they know, or we, the audience, have a different sense of what they're saying. Iago says he won't defame anyone, and Othello argues that saying that, quote, "My wife is fair, feeds well, loves company," that's not going to make him jealous. She's beautiful and virtuous, and she picked me. I have nothing to be jealous about. Here, of course, Othello should take his own advice. Iago says, "I'm glad you think that way, but, quote, look to your wife, observe her well with Cassio." Notice how in this passage, Desdemona is not referred to by her name, but by her role as, quote, wife. It's your wife and my wife, not Desdemona. And then, of course, Iago goes nuclear with the line, "She did deceive her father marrying you," which Othello can't disagree with. Her father thought it was witchcraft, that she is so good at being deceptive, says Iago. And again, Othello can't disagree with that. And then Iago changes tack and says, "Well, let's not think about it, because I can see that it's upsetting you." And Othello denies that it's upsetting him and says that he's fine. "Of course," says Iago, "she has turned down a lot of white men. Don't think about it. Yeah, let's just move on." And Iago exits, only to return and say, "One more thing, don't speak to Cassio and see how your wife reacts." Othello then has a speech where he says Iago's an honest man, which we know he isn't, and he's the salt of the earth, and he knows all about, quote, human dealings, presumably because he's lower class. "If he's right," says Othello, "I'll have to get rid of Desdemona. I wouldn't put up with that kind of thing. Of course, the problem is that Othello, I'm just too good." Says Othello, quote, "'Tis the plague of great ones." You see, when you're really great, you attract a lot of women, and then they're unfaithful to you. Enter Desdemona and Emilia. Desdemona wonders if Othello's alright and tries to use a handkerchief to bind his forehead. He pushes it away and the handkerchief falls. They go in together and Emilia picks up the handkerchief which her husband has wanted for a long time. Notice that this tells us that Iago has had a plan of some sort to try and destroy Othello's life for at least since he married Desdemona. Iago enters and Emilia says, "I've got something you want," and Iago is vulgar to her again, his response assuming that she's talking about sex. But he changes his tune when he realises she has the handkerchief, which he snatches off her. Emilia exits and Iago tells us he's going to plant the handkerchief in Cassio's lodgings so that he'll find it there. Enter Othello, tortured by thoughts of Desdemona's infidelity. Iago feigns sympathy. Othello used to be happy, and now he's not. He's never going to be able to enjoy anything ever again. Othello tells Iago he better be able to prove Desdemona's infidelity, or he'll have to answer to Othello's, quote, naked wrath. Iago, thus threatened, says he'll never be honest again, and that he should never have said anything. Othello says he wants proof, and Iago makes things worse by asking, "Would you like to watch them having sex?" Othello is appalled by the idea, and Iago says, however bad it is, those two shagging like rabbits, I'll make sure you have proof. And Othello says, "How do you know you'll be able to prove it?" Iago, who didn't want to mention it, of course, reluctantly reveals that Cassio talks in his sleep and mentioned Desdemona and how much they must hide their love. Othello is appalled, but Iago says, quote, "This was but his dream. It doesn't mean he's shagging your wife, it only means he's thinking about shagging your wife." Othello is enraged, and Iago asks him to calm down. They need more proof. Then Iago plays the handkerchief card and says he saw Cassio wipe his beard with it. As Othello gets more worked up, by Iago of course, Iago says, "You might have to change your mind," and Othello swears an oath that he will not. They kneel and the soldiers take a solemn vow that Iago will do whatever Othello asks, quote, "What bloody business ever." Othello asks Iago to kill Cassio, and he agrees, and Othello makes Iago his lieutenant. So in regards to what Iago told us at the opening of the play, that he was angry with Othello because he didn't get the job of lieutenant, at this point Iago has got what he wanted. He's now the new lieutenant. Also, it's interesting that Othello wants to kill Cassio at this point in the play, before he's ever seen the handkerchief. Act 3, Scene 4, Desdemona, Emilia and the clown have some fun with the word lies, where Cassio lies and whether he lies. Notice that lying and honesty are themes of the play. Desdemona notices that her handkerchief is missing, and Emilia feigns ignorance of its whereabouts. Enter Othello, filled with suspicion and distrust, and Desdemona wants to ask Othello about Cassio, which doesn't help the situation. Othello asks her where her handkerchief is, that he gave her as a gift. It was his mother's handkerchief, which she received from, quote, a charmer somewhere in the mysterious East. Of course, we know she doesn't have it. Othello and Desdemona have a row about it, and Othello storms off. Enter Cassio and Iago, and Desdemona and Cassio start talking in that polite, courtly manner again. Emilia tells Iago that Othello's angrily stormed off, and Iago says that he can't imagine what makes Othello angry, because normally he's never angry about anything. Iago exits, and Desdemona wonders if affairs of state are weighing on Othello's mind, and remembers, quote, that men are not gods, which is a mistake that any woman could make, of course. But it's Emilia who hopes it's not jealousy. She gets it right away, and she warns Desdemona how dangerous jealousy can be. They go off to find Othello, and Cassio meets Bianca, who is his mistress. She wants to know why she hasn't seen him in so long. He apologises and tries to give her Desdemona's handkerchief, which he tells us he found in his lodgings. Bianca is jealous that it's another woman's handkerchief, and now she says she understands why she hasn't seen him in so long. Notice Bianca is jealous in much the same way that Othello is jealous. Act 4 opens with Othello and Iago discussing what counts as infidelity. A private kiss perhaps, or lying naked in bed, or even a lost handkerchief. Iago argues that if Othello gave her the handkerchief, then the handkerchief belongs to Desdemona, and she can do with it what she likes. And may she do what she likes with her honour, asks Othello, for the handkerchief and Desdemona's honour are now confused as the same thing. Cassio's been talking about it, but he lies, and then Iago plays on a pun in the word, much in the same way as the clown did at the opening of Act 3. Othello gets so worked up he has an epileptic fit, and apparently he had one yesterday as well. Enter Cassio. Neither Cassio nor Iago are surprised by Othello's epileptic fit, which, of course, in the 15th, 16th century would have been associated with lunacy and with evil spirits. Iago assigns it to Othello being, quote, overwhelmed with your grief. Iago says that Othello needs to calm down, and he'll get Cassio to confess. He asks Othello to withdraw a short distance away into a hiding place where he can overhear their conversation. And he tells Othello that he'll question Cassio. But of course he'll be talking to Cassio about Bianca, but he's going to make it look like he's talking about Desdemona. Enter Cassio, and Iago tells him to, quote, ply Desdemona. The pun is intended here. And then he asks him about Bianca, quietly. Does she love him? Will he marry her? And Cassio says he can't marry her, he's only a customer, like everyone else. I'm not that stupid, says Cassio, and how they all laugh about it. Marry her. She was hanging around the other day, I can't get rid of her, says Cassio. Enter Bianca, who has the handkerchief, and says, you gave me this from another woman, a tart, a whore. She storms off and he follows her, leaving Iago to sympathise with Othello, who's come out of his hiding place. Sorry about your handkerchief, boss. She gave it to him, quote, she gave it to him, and he hath given it his whore. Othello is convinced and starts talking about murdering his wife. So he's moved from talking about murdering Cassio to murdering Desdemona. It's Iago who suggests that he strangles her. And, says Iago, I'll take out Cassio, quote, let me be his undertaker. Then there's trumpets, and enter Ludovico, Desdemona's cousin from Venice. And Desdemona. Ludovico has a letter from Venice. Remember Venice? Which tells Othello to return to Venice and leave Cassio in his place. But Othello thinks that Cassio has already, quote, been in his place, as it were, and Othello gets angry. He strikes Desdemona in public and leaves grief-stricken. Ludovico can't believe it, and Iago says that Othello has changed a lot. You wouldn't believe how bad he's got. Just follow him and see. In scene 2, Othello questions Emilia, his wife's maid, about her supposed affair with Cassio. Emilia says that Desdemona is innocent, and she'd stake her life on it. Othello asks her to get Desdemona, and while she's gone, Othello tells us that Emilia is, quote, a simple bawd, and then again she's also, quote, a subtle whore. How does Othello know this? How does he know this about Iago's wife? Enter Desdemona, Emilia. Othello sends Emilia out and tells her to guard the door. Here's the big scene between Othello, sure of Desdemona's guilt, and Desdemona, who's completely innocent. Notice how Othello is wrong about Desdemona, just like Desdemona's father was in Act 1. Othello assumes her guilt. She professes her innocence. Even saying it, the letter that he's just received came from her father, it would make no difference, she would still stay with him. Othello says he could have taken any affliction that the world would have thrown against him, but not this. Desdemona asks what sin she has committed, and Othello is enraged by the question, and calls her, quote, an impudent strumpet. She protests her innocence, he won't listen. He calls in Emilia, and before leaving he gives Emilia money. The word bawd, which is used earlier in the scene, technically means a woman who runs a brothel. So he's pretending that Emilia is running a brothel and that Desdemona is a whore. Desdemona is distraught and wonders what she might have done. Enter Iago. Iago pretends to care about Desdemona, and she asks him, "Am I that name, Iago?" In other words, am I a whore? Iago avoids the question. Emilia says, think of all the nice men she turned down to now be called a whore. Iago says he can't imagine what's happened, but Emilia obviously suspects that, quote, some eternal villain has caused this problem. She realises it's Iago, and as Desdemona calls for the man who's wronged her to be pardoned, Emilia calls for the man who's wronged her to be executed. Aside, Emilia says to Iago that it was some sort of idiot that got you to believe that I'd slept with Othello, which means she knows about the rumours and that the rumours are untrue. Is Emilia the victim of slander, just like Desdemona? Iago denies it, but then he's hardly a reliable character witness. Poor Desdemona is in deep despair and on her knees. She does the only thing she can think of. She asks Iago for help. He says it's just Othello in a mood, affairs of state, etc. The trumpet sounds and Desdemona and Emilia exit, hoping that things might get better. Enter Rodrigo, remember him? Who is waking up to the scam that Iago has perpetrated on him. Turns out he's given jewels to Iago to give to Desdemona to win her over, and he's got nothing in return. Iago initially ignores him, preoccupied with other things, until Rodrigo suggests that he'll have to go to Desdemona himself, which would of course blow up all Iago's plans. Iago then takes notice of him and says, well, now you're talking, if you really want Desdemona, you can have her. All you need to do is follow my plan. All you need to do is get rid of Cassio tonight outside a harlot's house. You kill him and I'll help you. Notice that Rodrigo is still doing all the work for Iago. Scene 3, Othello goes for a walk with Ludovico and tells Desdemona to go to bed. Desdemona and Emilia discuss what this might mean. Desdemona tells her that her mother had a black maid who sang a song about a willow, which Desdemona then sings. The willow, of course, is a tree that signifies sorrow, as it is a weeping willow. Desdemona prepares for bed while she's singing, and Desdemona asks Emilia if she thinks there are women who are unfaithful to their husbands. Perhaps she's talking about Emilia. Emilia says she is sure there is, and Desdemona says she couldn't do that. And Emilia says she'd only do it in the dark. Desdemona says she wouldn't, but Emilia disagrees. She says she'd commit adultery to make her husband a monarch. So, did she in fact sleep with Othello? Maybe to advance Iago's career? We don't know, we're not told. Emilia then has a famous speech about women cheating on their husbands. Women have got needs just like men, and anyway, it's all men's fault that their wives cheat on them. Men think that they can replace their women with other women, so why shouldn't women do the same? Lots of men know we see what they do, and we only copy what they're doing. By the end of the speech, Desdemona has fallen asleep. She's fallen asleep, of course, because she has a clear conscience. Act 5 opens at night in the street. Iago and Rodrigo again. They intend to kill Cassio. Iago tells us whoever ends up dead, he'll still benefit from it. And at this late stage in the play, he gives us a psychological insight into his motives when he says of Cassio, quote, "He hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly." Enter Cassio. There's a fight. Rodrigo falls. Iago stabs Cassio from behind and exits. Both men appear slain. Othello enters to see what he thinks is Cassio dying, and therefore he feels he must kill Desdemona. Exit Othello. Ludovico and Gratiano enter, but are unsure what to do. Enter Iago with light to sort out the situation. Who's attacked poor Cassio? There he is, it's Rodrigo. So Iago stabs Rodrigo and finishes him off. And now we know just how bad, evil Iago is. Cassio is injured. Ludovico and Gratiano finally help out. Enter Bianca, who swoons at the sight of her injured Cassio. But Iago implicates her in the attack. Cassio is carried off, and Emilia begins to accuse Bianca again. Enter Emilia, who learns what's happened and calls Bianca a strumpet. And Bianca says, "It takes one to know one." In scene 2, enter Othello with a light. Desdemona is asleep in the bedchamber. Othello realises that he can put the light out and then relight it again, but if he puts out Desdemona's light, there's no going back. And he almost doesn't proceed because she looks so beautiful and innocent. Desdemona awakes and Othello asks if she's prayed. Does she wish to confess? But she protests her innocence. Cassio, he thinks, is dead. She weeps, and he says she weeps for Cassio. Desdemona says, "Don't kill me," as Othello murders her. Emilia is banging on the door, trying to stop him, but it's too late. Emilia tells Othello Cassio's not dead, and discovers the dying Desdemona. Othello tries to get out of it, but then confesses, and it all comes out. Cassio had sex with her, your husband told me, and we all know that Iago is, quote, an honest man. Emilia, unintimidated by Othello's threats, cries murder, murder, and enter Montano and Gratiano and Iago. Emilia tells Iago to deny what he did, and Iago freely admits that he told Othello his wife had cheated on him. Emilia won't be quiet or go home or do what her husband tells her to do. Othello realises his mistake, but says, "How could this happen? I saw the handkerchief." And Emilia realises the whole plot, and despite threats from Iago, she spills the beans. Othello tries to kill Iago but fails. Iago kills Emilia and runs away. They go after him, and Othello and the dying Emilia are left on stage. Emilia dies, Iago is captured and returns with Cassio, who explains to Othello how he found the handkerchief in his room. Ludovico tells Othello he's lost everything. Othello kills himself. Cassio is left to torture Iago, and fall the curtain, the end. So that's just a short summary of what happens in Act 3, Act 4 and Act 5 of Shakespeare's Othello. The division between Act 3 and Act 4 is not very strong or apparent, but Act 5 is really the only act that has any violence in it, except perhaps for some drunken handbags in Act 2. For a play full of characters who are soldiers who go off to war at the end of Act 1, there's really only any action in Act 5. Well, I hope this episode gives you some insight into what happens in Othello, and we'll see you next time on the Shakespeare Podcast.